through any verbal description and through all ordinary means of looking at things, you would have to conclude that all humans, I can say, are driven by, or I could say are pursuing, one of two muses, either the horizontal or the vertical. It might sound more poetic to say that everyone's either pursuing a vertical or a horizontal muse, but it's also as fair to say that people are driven. Now, when you're living inside a colossal beanbag, when you're dealing with the true dimensionality of magnetism, it doesn't matter whether you say that something apparently is positively charged or negatively charged, because if you go far enough in any direction, if you followed a positive charge far enough through a closed universe, it would become negative. But everyone is wired up, all humans, to apparently be driven by the desire to pursue a horizontal life or a vertical life. Both camps have a very strange impression of the other. I say strange, of course, from my viewpoint, because whatever their viewpoint of one another is out in the ordinary world, that's what it should be. But let us assume that people attracted to this start off somewhere close to this great cosmic contradictory crux, that you were somewhat uncertain as to where you belong. Now, I know that I'm being charitable to some of you, because some of you were on the verge of believing that you were about to inherit your great wax wings from some secret superpower before I met you. But let's assume that you have now at least the ability to stand at a particular crossroads and you can hear something about both directions. Now, when I described I mentioned a group of people who seem to be driven by the desire to pursue a horizontal muse, that is, of course, those who seem to, speaking in the extreme, get all their satisfaction, get a sufficient satisfaction, have sufficient interest in the ordinary world, that their occupation, the desire for money, fame, etc., that they seem to get up every day and they're pursuing the good life. They seem to be happy doing what they're doing. They always have a plan, how much money they will have, what kind of new car they'll have in 2 years, how many stocks and bonds they'll have. Now, those that apparently are pursuing a vertical muse are those that would normally be referred to as spiritual seekers. And let's start off again speaking somewhat at the extreme. Be those kind of people that in a few years past would have joined a religious cult, joined up with a commune if they didn't have an immediate leader. They read all the esoteric books, all the New Age magazines. And in the extreme, they would express almost no interest in the ordinary world, that they would be the ones who would attack a life of Caesar, and they would poo-poo collection of money and believe that fame was a fleeting shadow. Now, if we take the extremes, pick out a person on either end of this spectrum, when they look upon each other, when they pass one another's consciousness, they look upon each other as being the epitome of the misled. And it's not in quality, it's in quantity. It doesn't matter to the vertically driven person, it doesn't matter how many hours a day the horizontally driven person works, whether they work 7 days a week, how fast they're succeeding. The strangeness to the vertical group is the quantity of how can someone waste their life going after this. Now remember, I'm talking about extremes, and when I talk about the vertically driven right now, I'm not talking about anything of any great consequence. They are as mechanical as the horizontally driven. Then the horizontally driven look upon the vertically driven, again taking an extreme position right now, an extreme example. This extreme horizontally driven person would look upon the vertically driven as being almost eligible for state care. That the people are anacronyms. They're probably brain damage from eating white rice and no hamburgers. They're probably all wimps. And it's, again, in this case, it is not the quantity of what they do, of how many metaphysical books they read, how many lectures they attend. It is the quality of how can they waste their life when it's going nowhere. All of these spiritual groups are frauds. Most of them seem to have some interest in a life after death, and to the horizontally driven, the extremely horizontally driven example, life after death is a moot question. Nobody knows. Some of these gurus and preachers, and my grandfather said he knew, but nobody knows. All we know for certain is that I got to get up tomorrow. All I know for certain is right now I've got this minute. They look upon the quality of what the vertically driven person is doing as being an absolute waste. Now, if you are properly standing and listening at the crux, and let us say that right now for the next few minutes while I'm talking about it, that you are neither completely in the hands of the gods or the Philistines, then you should be able to see that there is something strange about the quality of it in both camps. Now, you are completely captive of something if you believe that either one of these groups that I have described, which for the sake of what I'm discussing tonight, it comfortably, adequately fits all of humanity. Everybody falls in there except those that apparently are taking time out. There are a few of those always on the planet, and they're of no great consequence. Normally referred to as bums and ne'er-do-wells, hermits, and they're all playing their part. But what I'm saying is the kinds of people who are visible, those who seem to be active in life, seem to be playing some part in this great human drama, comfortably fall into one of these categories. But if you can stand in the midst, at the crux where these two would meet, and not be immediately captured by either of the muses, you should smell something in your own way that is peculiar in the quality of what they're doing. That is, to start pushing toward the extreme again, those absolutely satisfied, apparently, with the horizontal world. That something, and there's no way that you can prove this, and you have no standard to judge it by. Only those mechanically caught up into either of the two camps have the appearance of a mechanical standard to judge the other one and themselves by. But if you were correctly standing, if your awareness was right here at the crux, you would have no such standard. And so you just got to try and listen to what I'm saying. There is an aroma, there is a peculiarity about those, the further you get to the extreme of the horizontal line, that are driven by life. Now that would be the one that most of you listening to me now, and at some other time on tape, that would be the camp that most of you would immediately want be driven to find fault with. to immediately nod your head that, yes, something was wrong with those people because I was never caught up in that. And that certainly is not the correct payoff for one's life. It's simply collect a whole bunch of stuff. There might be attractive stuff, and there might be stuff that do 150 miles an hour. It might be stuff that's real comfortable to sit on. There might be stuff that I got on that has designer labels in it. But that can't be all there is to life. So something smells about those who apparently are just absolutely in the bosom of Caesar and just believe that Caesar is it. That you only go around once, and this is it, and give me another Schlitz, and I'm happy. But there is also an aroma. There is a strangeness in quality of those apparently driven almost totally by the apparent desire to pursue this vertical muse, the life of the spirit. Just mechanically, just the way things work, that would be the camp that most of you were drawn to, the majority of you, that will end up in something like this. Some of you should have the ability now to be able to look back and to see that there was an aroma about you when I met you. A self-satisfied aroma that I am a lot better off than some poor fool that is out trying to sell some boilerplate stock, somebody who is out doing aluminum siding, somebody killing himself to finish school, they go into some profession, and then they'll get run over the day they graduate and just waste their time. Wherein I'm building up some sort of cosmic reward. And plus I have a little sweet smile on my face because I don't eat red meat. And I don't drink, and I don't smoke, and I don't chew tobacco, and so therefore my teeth are clean, and I don't have cigarette burns in all my clothes. And I'm by and large a neat person. It's just I'm waiting for the big blast. I'm waiting for nirvana to finally come upon me. But I'm certainly glad that I'm in the position I am now, being the sweet-looking thing I am with my hair tied back or my hair down my back. I'm a lot better off than if I had fallen into the absolute clutches of Caesar and been driven by the ordinary rat race. There is a strangeness to that. Now, the strangeness, for those that are not completely captive by the two main streams of life's body in which humanity lives, the strangeness always is that people are doing what they must do, and just like me, they believe otherwise. And the further you get into the extremes of these camps, these people, as intelligent as they may be, as walking around intelligent as they are, it sure does almost stink that they have no idea that what they do is simply what they must do, and they understand nothing. Nothing. They don't understand anything about why they're doing what they're doing. They don't understand whether they have any choice to do it. And then almost as bad, and are a lot worse, they have absolutely no understanding, even less, and probably more, but even less, when they attack other people, such as the other camp. Because they have no idea what's driving these other people. They have no idea that the other people have no choice. They have no idea that the other people are just like them. They're just on another team. They just got on different colored jerseys. They're just in a different part of life's body. Of course, to say a different part is not all that great because they're still within reaching distance of one another. But I have another question. What would it be if this, whatever this is, What if this and all of its thisness, and this and all of its not thisness, of listening to tapes, listening to me, doing tasks, in some way it is obviously separate from life. You can't go out with ordinary people and talk about this. Ordinary people are not interested. If you tried to talk to them seriously, the more serious and sincere you'd try to be, the further they'd move away. Many of my comments, pictures, diagrams, maps on the nights we meet are just almost insane compared to what seems to be an ordinary horizontal viewpoint every day of what's going on in life. Although you get to the point that this begins to explain life. But the maps themselves, if you tried to live on the napkin, if you continued to live to wherein, like my story of the ants, that there was a distinct difference between the map and the reality, between the La Carte des Choses, between the reality, the essence, then this would always be, in a sense, a hobby. You would always be believing that you were involved with pursuing a vertical muse, that this was leading to something that would absolutely blow your life away, that you would suddenly, or most certainly, become some sort of a Buddha, that once you see enough, you know, forget why I may still be walking around and passing for halfway sane and decent. But if it happened to you, surely it would put you ultimately out in the woods in India, or up in a tree in North Georgia, or hidden in the Poconos somewhere. You'd be rendered almost speechless. You'd be so wise you could not be wasting your energy by talking to other people, especially just ordinary people about ordinary things. Anyway, this is obviously separate from life, and in a sense that is true. In a sense it's obviously true. In a sense it is seriously true. But I ask you, what if this should somehow merge? And I put merge in quotation marks because I meant merge. I meant something. What if you could not hardly tell the difference between this and not this? What if you couldn't hardly tell the difference between this and everybody else's vertical and horizontal life? What if you couldn't hardly tell the difference anymore in being here on the nights we meet, or you people watching the tapes, and any other night? What if you couldn't hardly tell the difference in doing some task that I come up with, you know, of popping in to all kinds of retail stores and reach and ask them, say, can you renew my library card for me? Don't go back to the people that you asked if they made keys. This is a new one. What if you couldn't hardly tell the difference between any of those tasks and any other thing that you were just sitting around the house and decided, maybe I'll go buy some, I don't know, maybe I'll go buy some ice cream, or I'll go to the store and maybe I'll buy something else. Or maybe I'll stop over in the meat department, since I've never spoken to anybody, and ask the man behind the counter if he could renew my library card. What if, I understand this is technical talk I'm using, but what if you couldn't hardly tell the difference between any of it? Now, those that constitute a fair number of people on this planet, they're mechanically driven, mechanically attracted to believe that they're pursuing, should be pursuing, a vertical muse, a vertical life they should be thinking about, feeling about, studying, discussing, and when possible, attending meetings, joining groups that would help their internal spiritual states. their mental states, their emotional states. Whatever terms they use, you people will now understand what I'm referring to. And it seems to be a true springboard that there is still with the people who believe they're pursuing either horizontal or vertical goals, that there seems to be their everyday life, things that they must do. And it doesn't matter what the individual feels. That their job may not be fitting in with necessarily their imagined spiritual interest, but they feel like that there's this kind of thing, their everyday life. But these other two possible pursuits of going for it, going for the big bud or the big slits, going for the big fun, or going for the big blast off, that both of those are in some way separate from life, from my life as it is now. And to them it always will be. But most of you heard was of no supreme ultimate importance, but most of you at one time or another I gave some sort of little blanket warning that if you really enjoyed when I met you, if you were really enjoying your imagined spiritual activities, your metaphysical pursuits, your dreams, that you shouldn't really get messed up in this. Because out in the ordinary world, those who are pursuing, who believe that they are pursuing the vertical muse, a spiritual life, it will always be as though it is a step away from them, a step beside them, a step above them. It is always separate from life, from this. Now, I'll tell you, of course, I try to integrate what I've learned from the great religious teachers, and I certainly try to use the kinds of metaphysical secrets and tips I picked up from my chiropractor. But still, there is my everyday life, and then is my pursuit, my dream. Now, when it's done right, I'm just telling you there is a supreme, I hate to scare you, but there is a supreme possibility that it might get in the area of merging. You might find yourself close to Mergerama. And it's no longer a hobby. It's no longer something out there, up there, over here, that you get all merged with it. Now, in the ordinary world, in these camps of the horizontal and the vertically driven, as I've described them, you can hear the vertically driven. For thousands of years, you can hear them say such things as, to correctly be a good Jew, it's actually be one. It's not to study to be one. You can't study to be one. You can't study to be a Christian. In some way, you got to merge with the reality of the teaching, with the reality of our cultural heritage in spiritual matters. That in some way, it's got to become your everyday life. Now, they say that, but you should be able to feel in yourself what I'm saying. If that actually happened, they wouldn't be that happy about it. And forget about any great metaphysical description. It would be like somebody took away their main hobby. If a good spiritually driven person was suddenly in some way merged with being a Muslim or a Buddhist, they'd be so empty, I guess then you'd have to at least try and offer them some direction to get on a good horizontal path. Well, now that you are a first-class Muslim, what you need is a new Cadillac. What you need to do is dump your wife and get a young woman and an airplane. Join Club Med, because they wouldn't have anything to do anymore. It would be as though someone had pulled the plug on their cosmic bathtub. But as long as we stand here, there seems to be a difference. There seems to be a real difference between the way you live and what I talk about, and not just what I talk about. If that's all it was, then you'll be wasting your time, but that which seems to touch you in some way, that yeah, I can hear it almost behind the words, that yeah, that is what I want, that is what is driving me, that is the itch I've been trying to scratch all my life. Your description is closer than anybody's, and there's something, even a passion behind it, that yeah, I'm in the right place, but it's still as though it is something. It's me, and then some kind of teaching, some kind of secret, and then you, in your everyday life. all the everyday shit of run holes and blisters and people fucking with you, tension headaches, getting older, somebody scratching your new car, you know, all that stuff, and you're trying to live a spiritual life, trying to pursue something worthwhile, and then, goddamn it, it's all this other crap. What if it just kind of all got mergerized? All right, what if, not rhetorically, what if, I ask as a real question, what if? Now I add, don't be too sure. Don't be too sure. Now I withdraw that. If you belong here, you can go ahead and be sure. Whatever it was that you thought in response to my question, go ahead and be sure. Doesn't matter anyway. But go ahead and be sure. If we take a body of people, it doesn't matter what the body is, some country, then you got the people in this country. It's called Slovenia. You got the people. And you can say that that's the power of that country. The people, all of them. The Slovenians. But then every group on this planet will end up with a governing body. For those of you newer to these tapes who need to hear this, this has nothing whatsoever to do with politics. I am using the examples in life that are always reflections of something else in man. It is a larger schematic of things going on in the body of life that apparently come out in man's so-called institutions, cultural patterns, political, economic trends, and this is all a larger web of what is going on inside of each person. Your consciousness is a part of it. But I want you to try and consider what I am saying, that there is always a group of people. It doesn't matter what people, it doesn't matter how the country came to be one country. That's irrelevant right now. But you've got this group, and they got a name. The country of Slovenia. Then you got the people, all of them, but then you've got this thing that's known as the government. And you got it everywhere on this planet. You always have. But now you hear such things as this. As this one country seems to be in some sort of non-flammable at the present hostility with a neighbor, a Cold War. And you will hear from some quarters that the two peoples have much in common, that they set up some sort of interchange of citizens and they visit one another. The governments continue to rattle sabers, threaten one another, but then you hear comments that these two peoples, the peoples, not the government, the everyday citizens, they travel, they get some leeway to travel back and forth, and they continue to comment about how much we have in common. And all these citizens get together and say, hey, do you want to attack us? And all these citizens say no. Do you think that we're living devils? No. You got anything against us? No. Well, we don't you either. Isn't it weird? And our government's got us all scared. Yeah, it is. And people write books about it. They've been writing about it for thousands of years. It's going on today. Remember, I'm not talking about politics. I'm about to jump somewhere else. But all of you surely know what I'm talking about. Instead of fooling around with Slovenia, let's use immediate living examples is America and Russia. There's a growing number, just a recurrence of this, a growing number of comments an attempted sociological, psychological inquiries into how can it be that the Russian people and the American people on a one-to-one basis seem to have much in common, even though they're from fairly different cultures, but they have this humanity in common. They all get together and they'll hold hands and sing a song and say, we don't want to fight each other, and boy, I wouldn't pay my taxes to buy another bomber. Isn't that great? What's wrong with the government? What's wrong with the government? How can the government be so out of touch with the people? Right. Now, here's where it gets good. If any of you can make the big jump. Well, as Buddha used to refer to it, was the BL. He called it the big leap. But no, he didn't. If anybody wants to look that up. I just take certain liberties with these historical figures. If they were dumb enough to come before me and then die, then they get whatever I give them. If you start off and say this group of people, this country, this nation, they are a power, the people themselves, these hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of people, whatever it is, then you end up always with a government of some kind. The government becomes a second power. The government becomes a second populace. You end up with two populations going under one name. And as always, humanity, at certain times and certain places, is blinded to the obvious. It's people of so-called intelligence, diplomats, political writers. Remember, I'm not talking about politics, even though I'm using it as an example. They will say, how can the people, well, let's take from our view, since all of you listening to me, I assume right now, for the immediate future will be in the Western world, the people here say, how can the Russian government be so out of touch with the people? The people seem to be so decent. They saw so much carnage and bloodshed during WW2. Boy, they don't want to have any more wars. They just, what they want is a new TV. They like to have a Cadillac. They'd like to be able to go in debt like you can on a Visa card. And here's these old men in the Kremlin, this government, and they're just absolutely out of touch. Why can't they be more reflective of the people, the way that our government's reflective of the people? That would be our story. This second body, this second population, that is a government, does not by any means have common aims with the first population. And political writers across the border will look at another government, another people's, and say, how can this government be so out of touch with the people? Conversely, how can the people put up with this government, even though they're not truly an elected government? Maybe this government took over by force. The government only amounts to the people in the employ of the government, including the standing armies, only amount to 8% of the population of that country. Those other 92%, they might be peasants with sharp sticks. But if 92% of the population picks up a sharp stick in each hand and attacks the other 8%, I mean, 8%'s only got one choice. They can hydrogen bomb them all, including themselves, away. But anything short of that, the 8% is going to get overtook with sharp sticks. And so, across the border, another observer says, how in the world can there be such a dichotomy? How will this population put up with a government that is not reflective of their wishes, as far as I can tell? You're dealing with two different groups, and they may have very little in common. Now I suggest to you also that would be as true if we were in Russia, and I was talking about the United States. Now we apparently elect them here and all that, and remember I'm not talking about politics, but we apparently elect our government. But if you think that people in power have common aims with you, it shows how ordinary you are. If you think the primary aims of our elected officials are your aims, we'll have to think up, or I should think up, a new descriptive term for fool's paradise. I hate continue to use that. If you believe that the aims of the people in general, not just you, but the population, that the main aims, whatever they might be described as today, are the aims of those in power, you're in for a long, cold winter. Because they are not. It is obvious, and yet no one can see it. I'm getting ready for the big leap here. With any group, nation, tribe, you got all the people, everybody, and then you always end up with a government. No matter what you may call the desire of the people at any given time, a desire for a better economy, a desire for peace, or desire for justice, whatever terms you want to use. At any given time, you could take a group and say, or let them vote even, but you could look at them from afar and say, from what I can see, if I had to give one goal as being their primary goal today, it would be thus and thus. Desire for peace, desire for a more equitable economy, or whatever. If then you look at the government, whether it be Russia, Albania, Transylvania, America, Brazil, the government always has one aim, and that's to stay in power. That's it. I don't care whether it's an American congressman, whether it's a Russian Politburo member, whether it's a general in a junta who took power and is now ruling in Argentina. That Argentine general, that tyrant, and your local congressman both have one common aim. They always merge. When you're in control, when you're in power, you want to stay in power, and that's the name of it. That's the beginning, that's the end of it. Here's the big leap. That is an absolute unrecognized, it's almost impossible for people to see it, external reality, and it is also an internal reality. That in every person you have got a population, what amounts to a population, and in every person you have got a government. And the aims, to say the very least, of the two do not necessarily ever run in parallel. And yet you have got the same situation internally with a person as that which seems to be the strange, inexplicable almost situation with external events, i.e., here's these people and their government, and they seem to be completely out of touch. They don't even seem to know it at times. I can't understand how the government stays in power. There's not that many of them. I can't understand why at times now this is not all the same example. I'm hitting 2 or 3 points now. Why is it the government will talk about that they want to do so-and-so, that they have seen and heard the wishes of the people for a better economy, and they've come up with these plans for a better economy. And yet I look at it and they don't do anything. They just say they do. And the people holler, well, never mind the economy, it's not going anywhere. Let's have some more freedom of expression. And the government says, hey, that's fine, you're right. Let's take, that needs to be attacked. We've been thinking about ourselves. What we're going to have is more freedom of expression. And you observe it and nothing happens. They're not going to improve the economy if it's going to create the slightest possibility that they're going to fall out of power. They're not going to give more freedom of expression if there's any possibility that's going to decrease their hold on power. That is a situation not in Russia, not in Argentina, although it may be. That is a situation inside of a human being. You have a governing body that by and large has nothing in common with those being governed, except for this. Always remember, the government, even if it's a government of tyranny, the government periodically, and sometimes constantly, talks about the same aims as the people have. The people, or somebody get up enough nerve, and they'll jump up on top of a statue in the midst of a tyrannical regime, and they'll holler, listen, you people are killing us since you took power. We're all starving to death. We can't stand it. We're suffocating. We don't have any kind of freedom, and you may kill me, but I'm telling you, everybody here feels the same way. And so maybe they do shoot him. But then the general will come out the next day and he said, you know, we've been thinking about what that guy said. And it has some validity. Do you think we enjoy having to kill you people? Heavens no. Do you think we enjoy having to have bodyguards all around us? Of course, they always, remember, there's always an enemy. We've been through this. There's always an enemy over the hill. That's the only reason we took power, is to help you people. That was that good old imaginary movie of when the prevailing army is in town. They've won you over, they've conquered the people, and they're rolling down the streets in their convertibles, and they stand up and they holler, "Hail, do you Finnish people? Us Germans, we're here, we're your friends. We're here to help you, we're not here to conquer you. We're your friends. Look upon us as your friends. Anyone on the street after 5 will be shot. Have a nice day." They say that, even if they're in power, through force. Remember, we're not talking about politics. Shame on you people that think we're talking about politics. Even those that take power by force, as soon as possible, they'll start talking in agreement with the expressed wishes from some quarter of the people. That we only took power by force, and we're only staying here by force for a short period of time, just to stabilize everything. What is it you people want? Who's got the nerve to speak up again? We'd like to have a little more freedom. We agree, we're working on it. And then you look, and they're not working on it. They got no intention of working on it. You're an idiot to think they're going to work on it. But you're also an idiot, even apparently the government did not take power by force, to think, well, I elected these people. Which I could push out a little further. Us people living here, most of you are ordinary people. They think that in some way that the government got freely elected. Somebody's in power. And if you think that their goal has anything by and large to do with the goals you have, you're an idiot. Once you're in power, you got one aim, that's to stay in power. The big leap is, that is the nature, if we were going to use a kind of psychological description for humanity, that is the nature of what you call I. That is a better description of what people describe as the ambivalence factor within the human person. That is a more profound detailing of what has been referred to as being the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. You can look upon humanity, you can feel it in yourself that you don't know where it came from. You might as well look upon it as a coup d'etat that happened in your cradle, that you woke up one day and there was a government in charge. And if your name is Fred, the government was Fred. All power seems to flow from Fred or from Mary. And you can try to talk to it. And at times, Fred seems to be the ultimate big brother. And go, my, you'd really like to do that? Well, that sounds very interesting. That's a darn good idea. We'd like to help out. And the idea has to do with lessening the power of Fred. You're an idiot. You are an idiot. Boy, talk about a cold summer. Talk about a cold fall. Talk about a cold lifetime. You're going to be waiting there. Waiting outside the gates of the Tsar. Waiting outside Richard Nixon's summer home. Waiting for somebody to throw you a scrap. You have had 2 or 3 or 4 decades that you've been dealing with the government internally. You've been dealing with that which seems to be I, which seems to be me, it's myself. And I seem to be in fair agreement. I've been calling it a partnership. Nobody has argued that. There seems to be a kind of partnership. I've led you all to the point that you believe that something is amiss with a partnership and it's not necessarily in your best interest. But now looking at it as a description, as being an internal reflection of the external reality of every body of people, described as a separate body of people on this planet, inside the body of life, but on this planet, every group of people have a government. They have a governing body. You got one too. And that governing body apparently is in agreement with your aims. Once you bring them up, why don't I do so-and-so? And the Tsar seems to say, well, I don't know whether we can do it today necessarily, but by God, that's a darn good idea. Why not? And the idea, somewhere inside the idea, somewhere within the plan, and this is true for almost any plan you can think of, if it's got anything to do with apparent change in you, is going to weaken the government. It's going to be taking away some of the power, some of the present power of the czar, of your Fred or of your Mary. And you present the idea. Let me run this by you, old king. I hope you won't shoot me or anything. Of course, you people, ordinary people, don't assume that your government's going to kill you. They have homes for people that feel that way. As I said, they're sort of bystanders. They're not the mainstream of life by any means. But it's like, king, oh king, let me run this idea by you. Why don't we try doing this for a change? And very often the king will say, hey, I never thought about that. You just read that, didn't you? I saw you reading that book on psychology or that self-help book, yeah? Well, that's very interesting. I never thought about that. Maybe we should get another book on it and read about it. Maybe you should report back and tell me, think about it overnight. Let me know. Sounds all right to me, and you're an idiot. Those in power, this is the way life is arranged, inside of life's body. And then in what appears to be political situations, although that is not what we're talking about, remember. If you believe that anybody in power is going to do anything that's going to weaken their power, you are an idiot. You don't know anything about the nature of life's body. On a real low level, you just don't know anything about history. You got ordinary consciousness. You look right in the face of the obvious and think, what's going on here? Those in power do not give up power. Those in power will not cooperate with those seeking to diminish their power. And that thing that seems to be you is not going to join you in doing anything that is going to diminish its power. It is there for a reason. Of course, the funny part is that I can make up these kinds of stories. I can take the obvious out in life and sometimes, on a good night, turn it inside out, and that some of you, and sometimes many of you, catch a glimpse of something that's going on. Not just the map that I made up, not just saying, well, that's kind of clever, I never thought about it that way. But you realize that I have described something in a way and from an angle that can give you a jolt. And oftentimes you realize, well, if I can hold on to what I have just sniffed just then, I can get another jolt at some other time out of this. It's not squeezed dry in my case yet. That this apparent agreement, this apparent potential agreement internally with me of things I'm going to do, it's never worked out. It doesn't work out in anybody. For me to say that ordinary change is ordinarily impossible, you could say it's easy enough for me to say, but there is a reason for it. And it's the same kind of reason. It's the same kind of reason, based upon the same kind of laws and principles going on in the maintenance of life's body, the same kind of laws and principles that keep a general in Paraguay from standing up on a balcony and somebody jump out and holler, you sure have mistreated us since you took power, and if you just quit, we'd be a lot happier. And the guy go, my God, I never thought of it. Really? Is that true? And everybody says, yeah. And they say, well, you know, forgive me. You know, I'm sorry as hell. I thought I was doing all right. And rip off his umlauts and throw them down and toss his hat in the rain, and leave. That is the same kind of possibility, the same kind of odds of that happening as it is with an ordinary person, or you at the ordinary level, of saying, you know what I should do? I should be nicer to people. I really should. And you run it by the government, and the government says, hey, why not? But if you were the sort, if you were the populace type, that the description of a nice group of people was not a fitting description for your country, that is for you as a group of people, for you to expect the government, your governing body, to say, yes, we should become nicer to people. What you are expecting is that government is going to take off its hat, rip off its stripes, the braid off its cap, break its sword, and say, let somebody else take over. If you believe that, you might as well move to Paraguay. Or you are living in Paraguay. You're living in a fool's Paraguay. I know this can get convoluted, especially you people that may be seeing some of this for the first time, the first few months, even the first year or so, and you may think I'm actually talking about politics, or there's some kind of secret message in here, or that I'm inferring something even when I say I'm not talking about politics. And you is wrong. I'm not inferring anything. But I am telling you that there is a reality going on, an obvious reality, and one of them is just almost a pitiful kind of obvious reality, that in any situation, only varying by intensity, but the reality is there all the way from someone who gets elected president of the local Lions Club, Kiwanis Club, somebody that takes over a bird-watching society, assuming that they can, by their own rules, be reelected, all the way from that to a local alderman, a county commissioner, a U.S. senator, a general in South America, a member of the Politburo and the Kremlin, your parents, people who apparently are in power over another group of people, assuming they belong there, just was not some sort of accidental fluke like you sneezing in the middle of your wedding ceremony. If you're in power, those in power are not going to cooperate in diminishing their power. That is not the way life is arranged. Your internal organs are not arranged that way. The body of you is not arranged for parts that seem to be governing other parts, relatively speaking, for them to relinquish their power, to turn it over, to abandon it. If you believe that, it shows how little you know. Your thoughts are not that way. Your so-called feelings are not that way. You're not wired up that way. Life is not wired up that way. Those in power have an overriding aim. They may have smaller aims, such as, I'd like to get a haircut later, I'd like to have something to eat. But the alderman, the county commissioner, the general, their overriding aim is to stay being an alderman, a general, a congressman. That's the aim. If you don't have that aim above all other aims, you don't belong there, and you won't stay there. It was a fluke. Now, those that apparently, to use ordinary terminology, are relatively stable and sane people, people who seem to have a rather consistent personality, they are the archetypical government. That there are two bodies going on. And the aims, the apparent aims of the so-called people and the apparent aims of the so-called government may never merge. They may continually be in conflict. And those being governed never know it. They can be fooled in a sense forever, because the government just keeps saying, we're going to do it tomorrow. Or the government says, we agree it should be done. The government says, that's a pretty good idea, tell us more. Forever, the government says, hey, I think we're finally coming into agreement. We'll hold elections soon. And people believe, tomorrow I'm going to cut out all chocolate. Tomorrow I'm going to start exercising. Well, maybe not, let's see, it's getting close to the weekend. Soon. And the government says, attaboy, now you folks are learning. Don't push your luck. Still inside the closed bag. How about the constant? Descriptions off of the jackets of books, advertisements for seminars, psychologists being interviewed, would-be spiritual teachers commenting upon the sorry state of current affairs. And they continue, all of them. Terminology may change a bit, but they're always just mentioning such things as, we must learn to deal with the stress. We have got to learn how to handle the enormous tensions of contemporary life. And everybody, all ordinary consciousness, reads, hears this, and in some way agrees with it. That yes, it's true, there's just tension. You got to learn how to deal with it. You got to learn how to deal with these kind of pressures. There's going on out there in life. I mean, it's easy enough to sit in here and read a book about Buddha said this and Buddha said that. But to go out there and that horrendous, that almost suffocating pressure, tension, and all the descriptions are unknowingly like this, and they're taken like this. That it's only the person being spoken to. As you're reading it, and so you're being spoken to and you're agreeing with it, you're being spoken to as the only victim, and that everybody else is the perpetrator. That this is one of the situations that too many of you are either going to believe that I'm stating the obvious, or too many of you are going to believe that it's too complicated to get anything out of, that I'm off on some very oblique track. This is back to one thing that I brought up several times that I always admit is tricky to talk about, and that is that consciousness is arranged in such a way that everybody puts themselves at the center of everything they perceive, of everything they talk about, everything they think about. And this is not having to do with so-called ego. That's not it. It's the unrecognized basis of everyone believing that I am thinking something. But what you're thinking is always on the basis that it's me here in the center, my thinking, and then it radiates from this, and so I can't think anything unless it's me thinking it. Anything I'm thinking is the same thing as me thinking it. It's not that I've had some great thought or me having some opinion. The opinion may be in the majority. The opinion may apparently satisfy your spiritual nature. It may apparently want you to slap yourself on the back. But there is no such thing as an objective thinking, objective feeling, objective perception. And it cannot be seen. That's why I have come up, I can come up with another one, I guess, someday, of me pointing out that if you tell ordinary consciousness, the ordinary brain, that it has limits, it's like a fence running around this huge area up here, and the fence itself looks high and low, and it cannot find any limits. If you say that one fair description, if it could be understood, of what keeps people where they are, is that they put themselves at the center of everything that they think. And they don't see that. They don't see that they cannot think without it being them thinking. It's the same difficulty in me trying to point out from another direction what I'm doing right now. As a psychologist, spiritual teacher, rabbi, minister, somebody says, we all have some kind of built-in or acquired patterns. And the best we can, we try and cope with life. To cope with these horrendous tensions out there. And everybody feels, yeah, everybody does feel that there's some tension. Life is not just a chocolate-covered cherry. There's tension. And the unsaid part is, the unspoken part is, that there's a source for this tension. And what is the source? It's other fucking people. But how about those people? When they hear about tensions, what do they think about? I don't know about that. I got my own problems. How about the people? You hear that we should, if you read this book, perhaps it'll give you a few new weapons, a few new things to put in your arsenal to try and help you deal with the kind of tensions that can absolutely wreck your life, can actually make you ill. Maybe when you think of the tensions, you think about several of your supervisors where you work. Jesus, I could use some kind of psychological help in dealing with those fuckers. They're sitting home watching the same show. What do they think? And, of course, you hear that I'm suggesting that they hear it, and they too agree that, Jesus, this tension, yeah. In fact, I feel that ulcer about to blow up again. But everybody feels as though the source for unwanted, untoward emotions in life, aggression, hostility, stress, that I am the victim and there are perpetrators out there. In a sense, I am the only victim. I'm the one reading this, I'm the one hearing this, I'm the one agreeing with this. Somebody causes this. I didn't cause my own tension. I don't go out and make myself tense every day. I don't act aggressive toward myself. I don't threaten me. When I go into work in the morning, I don't suddenly turn on me and look at me in such a way as I feel like, oh my God, what I do. No, I don't do that. It's other people. Tense every day. I don't act aggressive toward myself. I don't threaten me. When I go into work in the morning, I don't suddenly turn on me and look at me in such a way as I feel like, oh my God, what I do. No, I don't do that. It's other people. The source of all unwanted emotion is other people. But what are they up to when they hear it? And everybody believes, though. And am I going to be foolish enough to tell you it's not true? Not yet. But everybody believes, without any doubt. All you people believe there is such a thing as stress and tension. I can feel it. It happens to me during life. It happens to me out there during the day. All right, where does it come from? Well, it's the way other people treat me. How far do I have to carry this? Your supervisors, they're getting together once a week or maybe every night and thinking, does he look tense enough? You know the guy I mean. Have we slacked off on him or her? What are we going to do? This is not just to make some cheap joke. Everyone on this planet believes it. They don't necessarily, of course, describe to themselves that the whole world are the perpetrators of this tension. But they do feel, I am the victim, I'm the recipient of tension. And there are people that I can identify as being the causes, the sources of it. Well, how does this work now? If we're going to look upon life on this planet, human life, this gigantic garden, and here you are, a put-upon petunia. All right, are the other groups of flowers that their one purpose in being there is to create tension for your type? Is there just one or two, or at least a finite number of sources for tension, for hostility, for any emotion that seems to be unprofitable to you? Are there a finite number of sources for this? Is life divided up into the tense and the tense makers? Not tent makers. This is not Monty Python. The tense makers. Is that the way it is? At least any of you stumble along here, I'll tell you, no, that ain't the way it is. The first interesting part, as always should be, those of you that begin to see anything, get anything from this, is how has it been so subtly arranged that this becomes absolutely, staggeringly obvious to me, and I've never seen it. And I also realize I'd never seen it accidentally or mechanically, and I also realize nobody else is going to see it. that if I tried to point out, somebody's going to say, oh, sure, that's obvious. What do you want to eat today? We must learn to deal with tension. All right, if we're going to deal with it, how about first, where does it come from? Let's really get rational. Where does it come from? Are those the true sources of it? Why have I never questioned where the source is? Why do I feel like that is a source of tension? If this should somehow merge in you with your everyday life, what could we ever talk about? How could you ever feel, how could you identify any external source of blank? Fill it in. Discomfort, tension, aggression. How could ordinary consciousness ever perceive of living inside of a closed system? Don't worry, I'm going to answer that one. I just gave you a couple of seconds. It cannot. At least any of you think that you're slipping behind. The only way that it can ever conceive of being in a closed system, apparently, would be that if your consciousness merged with something else, that there was no difference between life and you being conscious. That is not even the BL, that's the BP, sometimes known as the BPO. That's the big payoff. But after the big payoff, what can you say? Thank you for having me. Did I leave my umbrella in here? Oh, am I the last one to leave? You can only talk about this as long as you can keep a distance from it. You can only attempt somehow to do this, whatever it is, if you stay some distance from it. And one way, of course, to stay some distance from it is to have a method. Such as, well, here's a method that'll bring you closer to it. All right, good. Because as long as you got that, you got a buffer zone. As long as you got that, you'll never be completely nude. There's no chance of you actually merging with it, because you always got some clothes on. You always got at least the fig leaf, if you want to take the good old Judaic story, that one version, that one time there it was, Fred and Mary were naked and stand out there and didn't even know it. And then ate from the tree of knowledge. That is, developed a yellow circuit. And the balance of power began to shift. ever so slightly, but it has now shifted from what it was between the three balanced forces. And the story says they were kicked out of paradise. Well, I think the story first says that some force, God said, boy, you people are naked. They went, ooh, we are. And so they put on some clothes, albeit fig leaves. That's before Gucci got into using plants for dress, I guess. But they did the best they could do. And then they were separate. They were thrown out of paradise. They got unmerged. And then they could discuss it. Then Fred and Mary, that is Adam and Eve, straighten up their fig leaves, take one last look at paradise and walk down the road and finally sit down and say, Jesus, assuming they could say that at that time, say, Jesus, what just happened back there? What have we been through? And Mary said, I don't know, but by God, we got enough to talk on the rest of our life, even though we don't have TV or books. Now, we can discuss this for a long time. The only way you can discuss this is to be slightly separate from it, which everybody is. You got to have on the fig leaves. You got to be outside the garden. You got to be in some way cut off. But here's the tricky part, is this is not a downfall. It's not something that happened in the past you're trying to regain. It was like humanity fell down once. It was like they fell down as the merry-go-round was going around. They'd already gone up one notch, and they tripped from one viewpoint. But when they tripped, they're already higher than they were when they started. So there's nowhere to go back to. But it's now a part of believing in many circles, in many circuits, children, animals, even some people that seem to be driven by the spiritual muse are in some way simplistic, closer to the gods, less covered by subterfuge. In other words, what they're saying is they got either no yellow circuit or they're running on a 2-watt bulb. Which is fine, they serve their purpose, but to believe just because some little girl is living up in the woods of Oregon and has had nothing for the last 3 years to eat except one piece of rice every other week, and her blood is down to the consistency of cheap coffee, and she seems to have a benevolent look on her face, has been smiling now for 4 or 5 months. That's a variation of looking up the Indian gurus and all that, and to find somebody. And there are people around that look like that. And they've been sitting there in one position very quietly, softly. They're too weak to get up. If any of you doubt it, all you got to do is go on a fast and find out what will happen to the yellow circuit. And to believe, well, I'll go there and learn something from these people. To believe that there is a fascination that we should return back to those simpler days of yesteryear when you're named the Lone Ranger. There was no falling from grace, there was a separation from a previous state, but it was progression, it was evolution. All of these stories, it's not just limited to the Mediterranean. There's stories all over this planet, always have been, of some kind of fall from grace. But it was almost like a variation. A better description would be it was a cold shot. It was humanity suddenly being slapped. It was the idea that suddenly man realized there was a God, and the name of God was words. All they're describing is humanity becoming conscious. And the first ones, and some people can still feel remnants of it, that, boy, wouldn't it be great not to be conscious? Because if you ain't conscious in the human sense, you cannot be in the human sense tense. There is no stress. All you got to do is let me do my little operation on you with a Phillips screwdriver up here, get out that yellow circuit. Your boss can holler at you forever. Of course, until he fires you. Tension will be a thing of the past. Tension? You won't even know the meaning of the word tension. But all of you surely will now understand that is not progress. Or if that's what you want as progress, you're in the wrong place. There is no returning to a better state because there is no better state behind man. There's no better state behind you. But all of this is a descriptive reflection. To believe that in some way man has been cut off from another state, that's true. That man was cut off from a better state. All right, from one viewpoint, yes. But the viewpoint, what is being reflected is exactly what I was doing with my joke about cutting off your yellow circuit through a kind of crude lobotomy up through your nose with a screwdriver. That would take away, quote, all your human worries. It will. You will not be tense. You will not feel aggression from others. All of that which makes a mortal would be a thing of the past. You would have returned to those glorious days of yesteryear. But notice that it strikes something in people to believe that there is a state at some time that was superior to this one and we lost it. You moved on up. You got promoted. And in a sense, humanity never said. They were never queried. There was never a plebiscite to ask. The government did not say, would you people like to be promoted? That is not the way it works, remember. You were not consulted. Just here you are. There seems to be a government. There seems to be a plan. And yet there seems to be something lacking. There seems to be a separation. There seems to be a grasping out, a reaching out, and it's something I can almost touch. And surely this is it. This is the closest I've ever been. I've been hanging around here now with you for months or years, and it seems like I am getting closer and closer. I feel like I understand the way you talk more and more, and maybe if you would write some more books now, or I could read it, maybe I'd understand it more. As long as you're talking about it, you're still separate. As long as you're thinking about it, you're still separate. As long as it's, well, let's get together. It's the night to go down. I either look forward to it or I'm not particularly enthused tonight. Who knows? Where's the moon? What I eat last night? But tonight's the night to go and try to get another dose of it, to get closer to it. Tonight's the night to go down and see the tapes. But what if there is no difference between this and life? What if I could say in words that there is some satisfactory completion of this, and at least as much as I understand, you could understand, that you'd finally get there and that'd be the payoff. That'd be the payoff of the Jan system. What if you got there, forget Nirvana and Zion and Arcadia, but you got to living paradise. You got to the pinnacle of understanding what was going on in life. And there would be, I'll tell you this, there would not be, of course, as many of you already know, it would not necessarily be just this cut and ride, because there'd be a kind of strangeness, and there'd be some things that go on that could make Star Wars and science fiction movies look strange, look mundane, compared to what would be going on inside of you. But then let's say that it finally comes down and you find yourself on the new planet. What if you look around? And this planet has a sister planet. What if you look around this strange new place and it creeps up on you either real slow or real fast, which is the same thing on that planet. that I'm in a strange place, I'm in a place that I've never been, and this is it. I know this is the place I've been working for. And suddenly you realize, I recognize everything here. Have actually gone anywhere. Now, of course, you've gone somewhere. But to look around for all of the strange sights. What if the strangest sight you see? I guess the strangest might be, I could suggest, might be a mirror. I wonder if there's any purpose in me bringing all this up tonight. This activity, I guess, is one of, to those people who need it, has got to be the world's greatest, most satisfying hobby. As much as I enjoy sketching sometimes, as much as I used to enjoy fooling around with the piano myself. In other words, all I'm insinuating is I understand something about creative juices and pleasures from doing things. And so I can tell you, safely, anybody, whether you think you have had talent in some field or not, I can just tell you that for those who need it, this is the ultimate hobby. There's nothing like this. What would you do without it? If I suddenly died, if it was all over, what if you couldn't even find another place? Or what if the places you found just didn't hack it after this? In other words, for all intents and purposes, you lost this as a hobby. What would you do? No, you'd muddle on, you'd get through. I'm not trying to give you the blues. But what would you do? You would feel as though I have lost something. And I was getting close to it. I was really about to get somewhere. I was really beginning to understand, I think, some of the ways you talk, some of the things you were sketching out and talking about, and I began to be able to listen on 2 or 3 levels. I just knew I was getting closer and closer to a new space within myself, which is true. But what if you get to that new space? What if you can activate the brain in places where it's not activated now? What are you going to think about? Nobody ever asked that question. Well, I'm sure Buddhas and Moseses and Jesuses, probably me. God knows the kind of exciting, unnatural, unbelievable things you think about. Well, now we've been through this. I've asked you, how can you think of anything? You can think of flying pigs. Yeah, but I bet wide awake, blown away, spiritually evolved, intellectually involved people. God, imagine the kinds of things that must go in their brain. Well, you can only think so much. What are you going to think about? Yeah, but it's got to be astounding. Well, maybe, but I told you the most astounding thing in the world is to look around and realize, good God, I've never seen what in the hell is going on. Yeah, but I want to think astounding. I want to be able to, in my mind, I want to be able to astrally project to Jupiter and places where other spirits live and all that stuff. The real amazement is what's going on, the obvious. It's not obvious to anybody. To be able to do what many would-be mystical groups have been talking about for years and years, thousands of years, the development of the third eye, and all these drawings I see popping up in Tibet and India and Idaho, of people with a third eye that they've developed up here, through in some way doing all kinds of chaka khans and eating pecans and changing their names. And they develop this third eye in some way, and it penetrates, and they have drawings and diagrams, and it turns into crystals, and it drips blood, and I don't know what all. But think about that. How strange it is. How strange it is that over millennia, through 2 or 3 translations, through different cultures, This description turns out in English to be described as the third eye. All right. Some of you should already be able to suspect that that is a reflection of something. It's just rather interesting that it turns out to be described as the third eye, because it would be the ability, if you lost the hobby, is not to see with two eyes, which two eyes always give you the stereophonic sight that you got one choice or the other, that there are two opposing views, there are two possibilities going on here, which of course leads nowhere, which of course keeps you as one of the governed. To have three eyes is to be able to see all three forces at work. It's to be able to see a continuing dance. It's to be able to be merged to what's going on, and there is no difference between what you understand and what's going on. Are you still studying that weird system? Yes, I am. And it's becoming less and less weird. It makes more and more sense. It has really flowered since I've been studying it. When I started out, I bet I only understood that much of the system, and now I understand this much. When I first went there, the guy had only written one book. Now he's written 24, and I got them all. To be able to merge with it, what could you say about it? What would there be to study? There'd be no system. Of course, I have tried from the Alpha to make you see that there was no system inherent in this. Or at least I gave the obvious appearance that I was not going to present one right now. I kept claiming there was none, that there shouldn't be. And then had to go along such as, well, there's a little system. We meet every week on the same night. I continue for months, sometimes years. I'll use the same descriptions, the same terminology. I'll keep talking about some of the same things. I'll use some of the same diagrams. There seems to be some consistency to it. Seems to sometimes, as far as you're concerned, draw closer to it. Maybe I'm fixing to unveil it a little more, to pull up its dress a little and let you see more of the system. It begins to sound Zen-like in words, but what if there is no system? Just like I told you, there's nothing to unveil. If there was a skirt, something must be hidden, and I could pull it up and show it to you. I'd pull it up and show it to you, and all you'd see is just whatever was back here. Whatever it was covering up, you'd see it. Be backstage, be a wall, whatever's back here. Well, that obviously wasn't it, though, because I was waiting to see something supernatural, something mystical. That is for the first two camps. That is for those driven to pursue what seems to be a spiritual muse. That is where most people stay. That is the heart of all religion. That's the population of all would-be systems, work systems, Sufi systems, occult systems. As long as it's separate, you're safe. As long as it's separate, to varying degrees, you'll be tense. You'll be angry. You'll feel like you're either in the ebb or the flow. Some people may become a dynaflow. Well, I don't know why I brought all this up tonight, because there's surely more important things I could have talked about. There's some other descriptions I was going to take us closer into the world of subatomic physics, and had some whole new descriptions and some things I've been holding back for several weeks now. I guess what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to work out better outlines and start passing them out. And as long as we can keep the transcriptions going, though, of writing down all these tapes, I'm sure that someday, the longer I do this, that some coherent system will begin to reveal itself mystically. And you can study it all and become more and more familiar with it. then the system will be like a little napkin map inside of you that will blossom out and strangle you perhaps, or you'll become full of cellulose. But there's this little spark of this secret Jan system or some kind of system, and it'll just keep blossoming, and it'll take over my liver and my spleen and my colon, and it'll begin to get my lungs, and it'll get into my brain. And pretty soon, I will be the system. Well, I'll understand it. I'll understand it real good. And if you die, I'll be able to carry it on. I'll be able to tell people about it. The only redeeming part of that is I'll be dead. Thank God for the little things. Before we conclude, all you people, something arises continually, and it's time for me to mention it again. You people are not to engage, even amongst yourselves, in mechanical talk about what goes on here, what you think goes on here, what you think about tasks. Just anything that could be referred to as being conversation regarding this. Capital T-H-I-S. You people are not to sit around and discuss this in some mechanical fashion. I know this is hard for you newer people to fathom. It's easy enough, or easier enough, for me to say, don't go out and talk about it. Don't try to talk about it to people outside this. Don't try to talk about it to your old friends and your family. And most everyone will slip up, even while trying to agree to my few conditions, and you'll try it, and you learn, if you belong in this, you'll learn very quickly on your own that you can't go out and talk about it yet, or you can't talk about it now. But then I know that you people end up together. You'll see somebody from one of the other cities will be out, you'll visit here perhaps, and you'll want to sit around, you want to talk. You think, well, if I talk to some of the people here in the group that's been around longer than me, I bet they can really help me. They can give me some kind of inside help, and they'll put me on the fast track. Or, of course, better yet, I'll tell them everything I've thought about all this. You know, have you got all night? Put on some coffee, and I'll tell you everything I've thought about him and everything he says and everything I've tried to do, and I'll give you my own interpretations and little tricks I found. You are not to do that. Don't do that. Stop it. And normally, it always makes at least one of the people involved in it uncomfortable. That one of you think, I wish that person wasn't doing this. And then you don't know what to do. You know that I insist there can't be any sort of hostility and aggression going on between you, and you don't want to necessarily tell the other person, hush. I'm saying it beforehand to hush. Don't do that. You've got almost nothing of any value to say to one another about this. Not now. Of course, the dirty trick is when you get to the point that you could, you're getting so close to merging that you don't have anything to say anyway. You got your choice, either trust me or don't trust me. But do it. It's one of the conditions is do not attempt to engage one another in just ordinary sitting around conversation about this. Till you've been around this for a long time, and you're just making absolute rules, just not talk about it, even amongst yourselves. Just don't do that, all right? Now I've got a task for everybody. I want you to neuralize on this, and you can write down something for me if you want to, but it's not required. This is really, before you put anything down on paper in response to this, I want you to really have neuralized it up to giggy. Because it may be that you shouldn't put any pen to paper on this. But here is the task. Here's what I want you to consider and to neuralize. If the universe were seen as being C-force, then what might man be in the triaxial dance? The second part is if man were seen as being the sea force, what would the planet Earth, what might the planet Earth be? Keep those cards and letters and boxes that eventually some of you are going to ask, so I'm going to stick this on tape. If somebody asks about sleep and that their requirement for sleep had changed since they've become involved with this. Now, people ask me this. Some people require more sleep after a certain time. Some people seem to require less sleep. And the person that even asked the question tried to get more specific about having new energy and etc. But let me just tell you this. Whatever amount, we're talking about physical sleep, that you need is get it. And don't worry about it right now. Don't worry about whether you need more or whether you need less. Don't worry about whether you read that the average American gets 8.5 hours sleep, and if you're needing 9.5 and that you can't live without it, is get it. There's nothing else to think about right now. There's nothing to worry about. Don't try and fool around with sleep to any detriment, even any temporary discomfort to you. Get the amount of sleep you need. And this is not a real question, but somebody wrote a real nice, interesting commentary, some observations they had made. Part of it I wanted to just read. It said, sometimes I can look around at two people apparently engaged in a conflict, and it strikes me that on some level, the organism of each one truly understands the simple, real solution of the apparent conflict, and that no matter how each one may insist that he or she is ignorant of the other person's position and viewpoint, it strikes me again that on some level, they truly can see the other person's viewpoint. It's like two people, etc. I assume you hear the question. Not that I'd necessarily ever put it in that particular form, but I understand what they are noting, what they are suspecting. It is not, I'm not going to answer it now on just simply a psychological basis that, yeah, some way people apparently, or some way people unconsciously or subconsciously understand each other. The obvious is the obvious. If there was any reality to ordinary people understanding one another, then yeah, everybody understands each other, if there was any reality to it. But what I did want to respond to was in this way, is this is a very good beginning. This is a very good sighting of something. But look at it this way, pursue it along these lines. That the body of life itself, in which we're all living, it always knows the apparent both sides of what's going on. And it knows it, it knows it. So then you're faced with the kinds of questions about what might possibly, from that level, seep on down into human consciousness. Now, that's one way. The other way is to fully consider what I've tried to point out, as irrational as it is, that yes, it is true, but it's beyond words. That's why I hesitate to answer directly if I'm going ahead, that yes, it is true, but this is not on some subconscious level. It's not on any level that is capable of being described psychologically. But on the real level is, yes, everybody does understand each other. They don't understand each other, and they don't understand what it is that they understand. But once you can merge close enough to life that you begin to merge, that there is no difference between you and the living, organic reality of human life, then yeah, two people arguing, in a sense they understand each other, but it's in the sense that this is all going on inside of a living organism, that life itself is alive, that we are not a part of anything inorganic, that we're not separate. We are not fish out of water. But the fish cannot describe water. They cannot conceive of them being one with the environment. And so people cannot, at the so-called conscious level, or at the unconscious level, if there was such a thing as is described, they have no perception that the person arguing with me agrees with me, that we actually understand each other, but life understands itself. Life understands both of these so-called sides. It understands what apparently are all conflicts. Because of the organism in which the so-called conflict is taking place, it's not a conflict, it's an organic process. It's a growth process, it's a healing process. It's some necessary process in itself. It's only at the level of the process that apparently there's conflict going on. But in a sense, once you begin to understand that there is reality in what the person said that they were beginning to suspect, that people do understand each other. They do and they don't. Ordinary people do not. But life itself does, and the closer you merge with it, that's when the reality of the old religious ideas that I have no enemies, or that you shouldn't have enemies. How can you have an enemy? If you're all inside here, what are you going to do? You begin to understand, let's say, instead of fish and water, that you understand we're all living in this big closet, and I smell noxious fumes. I know how to, hey, now it strikes me, all the people that's always giving me grief, I'll light a damn match. I'll show them. That kind of reality, getting close to that kind of merging is what I'm suggesting to you, becomes the reality of the old dreams that I don't really have any enemies, or the old ideas that people should treat each other in a, quote, better fashion, that people should be able to treat their fellow man the way they'd want to be treated. We should just be decent. That cannot be an across-the-board situation. You'd have done away with all governments. You would have done away with the kind of processes that, to us, to ordinary consciousness, looks like conflict. But a few people can slip through with this. But it's then that you understand that there is no true mortal conflict going on between people. There is no reality behind two people saying they're arguing, and somebody says, you realize that it's a matter of semantics. They don't understand. They both actually are agreeing to this political argument, the political idea, and they got caught up in the semantics of it, and they're arguing, and it's kind of funny because they actually both agree and they don't understand it. It's not true. It is true, but it's not true. There's just apparently an argument going on. There's an organic process going on. The argument is just sort of the medium for it. And so, in a sense, a few people can understand that there is no conflict going on. These two people over there arguing about to hit each other, perhaps are hitting one another, over the correct definition of a neoliberal. That all of that is the medium for it. What's going on is transfers of energy. What's going on are organic processes within a larger organic process, life. And that they're not separate from it. It's laughable. There's no way to talk about separation from it. But only somebody that's not totally separated from it can ever get close to even suspecting this.